In this video, we will complete the heart for you. For the heart, we had taken the mitral stenosis as an example of the previous video. But as you know, the heart consists of the three layers: the endocardium, the myocardium, and the pericardium. The endocardium is involved in certain congenital diseases, congenital heart diseases, which may consist of atrial septal defect, ventricular septal defect, and patent ductus arteriosus. Now, in atrial septal defect, the blood will move from the left atrium to the right atrium, because the pressure in the left atrium is higher, then through the tricuspid valve, creating a murmur. So, this would be a tricuspid diastolic murmur. Usually, sooner or later, the atrial septal defect will close on its own. The ventricular septal defect would first of all cause a pansystolic murmur. And initially the blood would go from the left to the right side, but then as the pressure increases in the right side, this shunt would be reversed. And when this happens, there will be cyanosis, because unoxygenated blood will go onto the right side. So normally, since the left side pressure is higher, the blood would go from the left to the right, but gradually as the pressure on the right side increases, this shunt is reversed. Same is true with the patent ductus arteriosus, a pansystolic murmur at a different place, in which initially the shunt is always from the pulmonary to the aorta, from the aorta to the pulmonary, causing pulmonary hypertension. But when the shunt is reversed, then the right-sided unoxygenated blood reaches the aorta, and there is later on cyanosis. So these conditions are called as cyanotic heart diseases. Then endocardium can be involved by the type 3 immune complex mediated hypersensitivity reactions, and these immune complex mediated produces rheumatic involvement of valves which can stenose or regurgitate. The overall effect of all these diseases are different types of murmurs. For mitral stenosis, because of atrial contraction, there is a because of the rapid inflow phase, there is a mid-diastolic murmur, and because of the atrial contraction, there is a pre-systolic murmur. There is accentuated first heart sound and presence of opening snap. For mitral regurgitation, there is a pan-systolic murmur in the before the ejection click and ending in the mid-systole. In aortic stenosis, there is a ejection systolic murmur, and in aortic regurgitation, there is a early diastolic murmur. Lub-dub, like this, early diastolic murmur. In aortic stenosis, the murmur would radiate into the neck through the aorta, and aortic regurgitation will go towards the apex. And as for the mitral, the tricuspid stenosis, the tricuspid regurgitation, the pulmonary stenosis and pulmonary regurgitation. But the tricuspid stenosis usually signifies atrial septal defect, and there is a dynamic murmur as more blood passes through the tricuspid valve. So this, and along with this, the complication of a diseased endocardium can be subacute bacterial endocarditis, which presents with 4 physical signs: clubbing, splenomegaly, tender splenomegaly with rub, petechial hemorrhage, especially in retina conjunctiva, and microscopic hematuria. And subacute bacterial endocarditis is a very difficult complication because this infection can spread anywhere in the body and can produce extreme toxemia and death in such patients. So after finishing the endocardium, we go to the myocardium. The basic problem of the myocardium can be two: an acute problem and a chronic problem. The chronic problem is cardiomyopathy, which is weakness of the muscles because of various causes. The acute problem is ischemic heart disease. And this ischemic heart disease is closely related to dyslipidemia, which is closely related to altered glucose metabolism, which is related to diabetes, which is related to obesity. So this is called as the metabolic syndrome. Another effect of dyslipidemia is hypertension. And all this is produced because of atherosclerosis. So this acute ischemic heart disease presents as angina. When there is ischemia and pain, but firstly it is on exertion but relieved on rest. So there is a chest pain or radiating pain into the left shoulder, the jaw, and right up to the little finger of the left arm, and it is relieved on rest. Then there can be a permanent side type of pain not relieved on rest, in which there is myocardial infarction. One thing that you have to understand about myocardial infarction is that if this is one coronary artery emerging out of a larger branch of the coronary artery, the Virchow's triad is that the endothelium roughened because of the fat plaques, stasis because the blood can't flow properly, and altered coagulability of blood. This is called as Virchow's triad. So because of these three things, 1, 2 and 3, there is thrombosis. So now once there is thrombosis in the small artery, then this clot will extend proximally because of stasis. And this will produce thrombosis in the larger artery. So only if this was the area of infarct initially, then it will become larger as time passes. Therefore, early detection and a tablet which interferes with platelet adhesion like Dispirin would prevent extension of the thrombosis and would reduce the size of infarction, and therefore Dispirin within 1 hour of an heart attack would decrease the mortality in first heart attack from 22% to 12%. This is the most important thing to remember, because this can be advised on phone and that will decrease mortality. Then you can do thrombus busting, or you can do an angioplasty, and that, or you can do a bypass. So Dispirin, thrombolytic drugs, angioplasty, bypass, and heart transplant. This is the treatment of myocardial infarction. Chronic cardiomyopathy has many causes, and ultimately, when the heart fails sufficiently, you have to do a heart transplant. One thing is that when the muscle is damaged, here the muscle is damaged, then certain intracellular enzymes would increase, and one diagnostic feature is serum troponin. Another thing is that this ischemia may affect the conductive system of the heart. Producing various arrhythmias. I had told you about atrial fibrillation, and there is something short of atrial fibrillation can be extrasystole, when there is another node firing at the instead of one node, there may be another node which may be firing sometimes, and that can be an extrasystole. For that, let us understand a little about the electrocardiogram. The atrial wave is represented by a P wave. Then there is a PR interval. Then there is a Q wave, R wave, and S wave. And finally there is a T wave. This QRS complex signifies ventricular systole. This signifies atrial systole, and this T wave corresponds to the rapid inflow phase. Then of course you may have another P wave, the PR interval, the QR and S. QRNS and T. So there are two segments, an ST segment, a T wave, a P wave, and the PR interval. So now, let us see what individual changes of shape can be produced in ischemia. The first thing that you have to remember is that the Q wave deep a deep Q wave suggests infarction of the proximal wall. Supposing this is the proximal wall, this is the distal wall, all right, of the heart, and your lead is here, and you have a deep Q wave on this lead, then it signifies an infarction of the proximal wall here. Then the other change that occurs is there is ST elevation and T wave inversion or flattening. This primarily suggests ST elevation and T wave inversion. This suggests ischemia. Now if it is in the L1, then mainly the right side is involved. If it is in the L3 or V leads, then it is the left side that is involved. Then one of the enzymes that can be raised in infarction is serum troponin. Now we'll talk of the arrhythmias. So the arrhythmia can be tachycardia, can be bradycardia. But here the shape of the complex is normal. Then there can be an extrasystole, and there you have a P wave, a QRS, and then you have a QRS complex without a P wave. That means this complex has come without atrial systole, and that's why this is called as extrasystole. Then you have to wait more, you may miss this normal beat, and then you will get a normal beat. So this is an extrasystole, and if it starts coming, it leads to a regularly irregular pulse. And if this extrasystole, that means without a P wave, starts coming after every normal beat, then it is called as pulsus bigeminis. Then you have ventricular tachycardia, where you have only these beats, no relation to the P wave, and very close by, as close to each other, faster the heart rate, and you will have the heart rate on the monitor and on the EKG. Then there may be a conduction block, atrioventricular conduction block. So what is happening is that if this is the septum, here is the atrioventricular valve, here is the sinoatrial valve. The impulse comes here and sometimes passes and sometimes does not pass. So what is happening is that the PR interval is long, conduction is slowed, this is one type of AV block. The other is that there is a P wave which is almost like normal, but the next wave that comes, you have an increasing PR interval. So this PR interval is lesser than this one. So increasing till you miss the P fails to transmit. And this type is called as Wenckii-Bak's block. And then of course you may have ventricular fibrillation or a flat line, which is a diastolic arrest. So these are the various waves, in short, which you see in the electrocardiograms or monitors, and this indicates arrhythmia, and it must be managed by some drugs, by radio frequency ablation of extra areas of stimulus, or something which is like sinoatrial node, but it's an abnormal sinoatrial node. So you have to sometimes do a radio frequency ablation of them, and you may have to do digitalization to decrease tachycardia. Because the problem with tachycardia is that the heart contracts but the blood vessels would not be able to supply the muscle because in systole the pressure within the muscle is higher than the pressure in the coronary artery. So heart would supply itself only in diastole. So as the period of diastole goes on reducing with tachycardia, the heart would become ischemic. So you have to control tachycardia. Cardiac output would decrease and the heart muscle will go on becoming ischemic. So you may have to control tachycardia, and if there is no transmission and the ventricle has just come to a rest, then you may have to do what is called as pacing, external or internal pacing. That means you have to provide a pacemaker like the sinoatrial node from inside or outside. So arrhythmias are a major problem when seeing patients of heart attack. Now we will cover the pericardium. The pericardium can have suddenly fluid because there may be blood which may leak here. And what it will do, it will produce pressure on the heart and will prevent it from expanding. So when the heart cannot expand, there is no rapid inflow phase. So the blood volume that is being sucked in the heart is reduced, the cardiac output is reduced, and the patient goes into shock. But the back pressure is there because back pressure through the atrium is there, and therefore central venous pressure is increased and you have engorged veins. So in cardiac tamponade, you will have to quickly remove this extra fluid and stop the leak, because the person will die. And in this shock, unlike any other shock, the CVP instead of being lowered is raised. So a shock of cardiac tamponade is characterized by two things: pulsus, paradoxus. One component is a raised CVP with every inspiration, and the other is that when there is inspiration, there is lot of fall of systolic blood pressure, and if it is above 30 millimeters, then it's diagnostic of cardiac tamponade. You treat it by paracentesis. Chronically, instead of fluid constrictive pericarditis can also produce the same type of picture, except that the shock is very less marked because the heart has time to adapt. And in this constrictive pericarditis, the treatment is pericardectomy. Here you can do a paracentesis and hemostasis. But here the treatment is pericardectomy. So this finishes the three layers of the heart, the diseases of the three layers of the heart.